it is paper one class. It's Sunday evening, so it's paper one class. It's week 4, and that means that we're looking at composing really for the first time now tonight. Now we're just finishing out now a piece of work that I've done on speech writing and persuasive language. And I'm going to start by showing you, because there might be some new people on the platform. If there are, you're welcome, and hello to all of you guys who've been attending since the last few weeks. So we go into subjects, top tab. We then, when that opens up, we go to English 6th year, and then you will see there's last week's paper 1 class. And by the way, you 5th years, the notes are on your page as well. So there's last week's 6th year paper 1 class, paper 1 class for both years. There's last week's, the last 3 weeks paper 2 classes. I think my brain just might have broken down there for a second. Lily, it's interesting, Lily. If you look at that note by admin, then it says, please save any broader questions about the subject till the end of class. Keep your questions focused on the specific topics being discussed in today's class. So I'll come to that at the end of the class, Lily, and you might be a new student maybe, so maybe you're not aware of this, but I've already been through that in great detail, and I will deal with it at the end of the class, sometime around 9:15. So hopefully you're still here, and I'll answer your question then. But guys, remember, this is paper 1 class. I'm looking at paper 1 material. Any questions related to the specific work I'm doing, throw them into the chat. Anything broader, you have to wait until the end of the class when I say, okay, any broader questions then. Okay, so these are the notes, and as you know, I'm adding new notes in all the time. You'll start receiving books, I think, in the next week or two now. There's a huge amount of books to go out, but my understanding is that the distribution company is really getting up in gear, and from tomorrow they'll be flying out. But for the time being, we're looking at the notes. Now you'll see it says there 2022 speech task. It says 2018 speech task and 2019 speech task. So I'll certainly be looking at the 2022 one this evening, and I'd probably be looking at one of the other two. They're just examples of speeches and kind of sample responses to give you ideas. And you might be going, well, I'm not doing the speech, Paul. So that's grand. Good evening. Farewell. I hope you have a lovely Sunday, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Because, of course, the thing about these classes is the English course is so broad and wide that not everything I'll be covering at every moment will necessarily be relevant to what you want to prepare. But the great thing is there's tons of material for you to look at in the meantime in the recorded material. So what we're doing right now, however, is not going to those documents, but we're going to the 2026 paper 1 mind maps. You can see them there in the top line, number 3 across in the top line. It says 2021 paper 1 mind maps. So we're going to look at those now very, very quickly. If you don't mind opening those up. And we're going to go to page 6 in those, okay? And we're going to talk about composing. Now, composing is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most important part of leaving Cert English. And it is incredibly and criminally neglected by the majority of students. I understand why. And I certainly wouldn't be critical of any of my colleagues and the way they allocate time in class, because paper 2, the literature paper, is so work intensive and heavy with your poetry, huge amount of poetry to cover, your comparative texts, massive amount of work in that, and your single text preparation, that sometimes the paper 1 material, as I've said before, gets neglected, which is why we have this dedicated class. And the composing section is a section that we definitely don't want to neglect. So this is simply so somebody just typed Macbeth into the chat. So I've no idea what that's about, but it doesn't feel like it's about what the work is. So again, if people are arriving in late into classes, anyway, just be calm, Paul. Be calm. So we're going to talk about the composition, and it's massively, massively important. And we're going to do tons of work on this as we go through the year in all the different types of questions that get asked in the composition. And we're going to start off with our mind map, okay? Remember, paper 1 is language analysis. And on the language analysis is analysis and creativity. And what we're looking for, if you want to score well in composition, is creativity. I had this, it comes to me really fresh every time I start this every year. Years ago, and I mean decades ago, I've been teaching for 28 years. So I was in one of my first 3 or 4 years of teaching English. And I was at a conference. And while at that conference, I got into a discussion with a much more experienced teacher about what I felt at the time was the unfairness of the weighting of the marks, that there was only 50 marks for studied poetry, and there's a huge amount of work goes into studied poetry, and yet there was 100 marks for composing. And I'll never forget this lady, whoever she was, God bless her. She took me to task and she taught me a lesson, and it was a lesson I was glad to be taught, and I never forgot it. And she talked about the idea of what we are trying to foster. We're not just trying to foster people who can analyze, we're trying to foster people who can create. And we have to weight the exam to reward creativity. And that's why the composing section is worth so many marks, 25%. I love this quote from Albert Einstein, and we're going to talk about quotations and whether you can use them in composing as we go through the year. But what about this for a quote? Creativity is seeing what others see and thinking what no one else ever thought. And the reason I decided to start this mind map with that quote is because you often get people saying, Paul, if you're doing the personal essay, and like loads of people are going to do the personal essay, or if you're doing the speech, like it's really hard because like loads of people are going to be doing the speech. How can you make your work stand out? Well, I can tell you this, very rarely do you come across a speech or a personal essay or a short story or a magazine article or a discursive essay, all the different types of composition, which is truly original, interesting, and creative while demonstrating understanding of genre. It's that magical combination that I'm going to try to get to the bottom of as we go through this year, starting with tonight's class. Tonight's class is going to be about creativity, but it's going to be about creativity within a specific style or genre of writing. What do we know about composing? We know that it is on paper one. It is worth 100 marks or 25%. That's why I always think it's really funny, this idea that they're going to, now they're saying it's going to be for candidates sitting Leaving Cert 2028, but I'm skeptical, in the same way as they gave us dates when the Children's Hospital was going to be finished, and it keeps on getting pushed out, that they're going to introduce a 40% non-exam element to non-final exam element to the English paper. But we've already got a section that's worth 25%. It's a massive chunk of marks allocated to composing. So really we need to pay close attention to it. In my opinion, somewhere around 70 minutes is what you need to spend on your composing. Don't forget there are 2 hours and 50 minutes or 170 minutes on paper one. So I would certainly be spending approximately 70 minutes on my composing. It's a huge amount of marks. There will be 7 options on the paper. You have to answer one. And as we've discussed already, and I'm going to show you in a minute, the speech is, there's never been a year where there's not been a speech option. So now, Faye, thank you very much for existing. Here's my first question about the work we're doing tonight. I'm going to read it for you now. Would the speech be a good one to choose in general to do in paper one, or is it easier to score higher in other formats? Now, Faye, that's a great question. It's a very good Leaving Cert question. It's a strategic thinking question, and let's think about it. Is the speech easier than the other formats? It depends, Faye. It depends on whether the candidate who's answering the question has practiced writing speeches. It depends on whether that candidate is somebody who understands the genre expected, the aspects of genre expected in a speech. It depends on whether that person is informed and can make references which are interesting and which support the points they're making. So like anything else, Faye, you will find that certain types of writing suit you. The great thing about the composing section is that there are 7 options, and usually within those 7 options there are 5 different types of writing and different titles. Sometimes you might be somebody who goes, I really, really like the speech. I'm that kind of thinker. I'm opinionated, but I also understand the persuasive techniques. I attended Paul's classes. I watched the video content on speech writing and persuasive writing. I understand all the different formats of a speech. And you might go in and the title itself might not suit you. So there's a whole load of factors. What I would suggest is the only way you can find out whether the speech suits you is by attempting to write 1 or 2 of them over the course of 6th year. Okay, Chip, if you want to do that right now, let's do that right now. So we said 7 options, and I said you have to answer 1. Chip has asked, What are the other options? Let's have a look and see. Here is the, here is the 2025 paper 1. And here is the composing section from the 2025 paper 1. As you can see, we've already looked at this, but we look at it again here. So the discursive essay has been on every year for the last 7 years as an option. The speech is always on. There has never been a year where there hasn't been a speech option. The short story is always on. There has never been a year where there wasn't a short story option. The personal essay is always on. There has never been a year where there was not a personal essay section. The feature article, we're going to look at all of these as we go through the year. I'll look at all of these different types of writing. The feature article, again, is something which has become I won't hesitate now to say a permanent feature. It's on the paper pretty much every year now. It might not be, but the thing about the feature article is the questions can be very, very, very different within that feature article banner headline. We'll get to that when we get to it. And then, of course, there was another personal essay and a short story. The only type of essay, oh, Chip, Olivia, thanks very much. I'll answer those questions. That's fine. Thanks a million. The only types of questions, essays that weren't asked, that have been asked in the past last year, were the persuasive essay or the descriptive essay. The descriptive essay has kind of fallen out of favor. But again, when we get to aesthetic language and looking at descriptive essay, right, and I'll show you past descriptive essay questions. So essentially what you get is you get 7 options and you have to pick one. And what I'm saying to you is that one of those will be a speech. And I'm going to talk tonight about how we take the knowledge that we built in the last 3 weeks about how to analyze somebody else's speech, and that we saw at the end of last week's class in a creative writing exercise in that question B task about speaking to the aliens. And we're going to look at a couple of speech tasks from past exams, and we're going to look at some sample responses and try to get you think about the quality of them. Now, again, I'm going to get to the whole statistics thing tonight. So Tom, if you bear with me, should you only focus on one format or try to take a versatile approach? Jack, I think that's a great question. And my answer to that would be that you should really think about looking at 1 or 2 different formats over the course of 6th year until you find which one really suits you. So some people are really, really good. I had a student last year who was brilliant at writing short stories, couldn't write a speech or a personal essay to save his life. I've had other students that are really, really good at writing personal essays, quite strong at speeches because they're kind of logical, because a personal essay is essentially an opinion piece, but couldn't be creative in terms of description and narrative arcs that are expected in a short story. So it depends on different students, and what the only way you can find out is by thinking about the language genres and doing a bit of practice. Dylan, there's no again, if you're here for me to lie to you lads and tell you this one is the easiest, that one is the easiest, you're in the wrong place. I'm not going to tell you which one is the easiest, because in my opinion, over the years, the last 28 years of teaching tens of thousands of students, different students are stronger in different formats. The student who thinks about the format that they're strongest in before the exam is the student who's most likely to score well. Okay? No, examiners do not have preferences, Philip. Do you know what Philip? Examiners have preference for students who can display preparation in advance. That's not learning essays off by heart. That's understanding genre. Now, again, we're going to talk about marking schemes this evening in terms of the composing, and that's very, very, very important. Lila, again, I'll get to that and I'll show it to you, but we're not doing descriptive essays tonight, and we're not doing the short stories tonight, but we're going to look at all of that. Dumb question, no such thing. Just wondering, do you have any guides in terms of if we should be writing or composing a speech person essay each week? Oh no, Mohammed, I won't be doing one each week. What I try to do over the course of 6th year is get my guys to do 1 a month. And what I generally do is, now again, every teacher is different, and I'm not your full-time teacher. This class is simply an addendum to the work you're doing in school. It is not designed to replace it. It's just to give you ideas. But if you're asking what I tend to do is I cover the language genres in 5th year. So my guys will have a decent understanding of, persuasive writing, narrative writing, the elements of discursive writing. And then once a month, I'd say, right, there's the 2025 selection. I want you to do a composition for me by the end of next week on one of those. And then they can do the short story if they fancy it. They can do the persuasive essay. They can do a personal essay. And if I read the personal essay and I say, to be honest with you, Billy, that's not great, I think next time you should try another style. The student can decide to or just persist with that. That's up to them entirely. Again, I'm not going to discuss Ahmed stuff. I'm not going to discuss anything about adjustments. Whether or not you're going to get the same, because if I told you that, I know that for sure. They haven't announced that yet. And what you need to focus on is your preparation. And don't forget, your paper is marked fully without any adjustments first, and then they're applied afterwards. So you want to make sure that you manage the quality of your work and don't be worried about anything that's out of your control. Okay. So admin, if you're there, there's somebody there called New, and they're putting in comments. I would like that person to be blocked from putting in comments if that was possible, please. The how much should I write or approximately? Yeah, we're going to get to all that word count. Okay, so let's get going into the work. So I was asked about the different titles, and okay, if you bear with me, we're going to talk about length and all that stuff now. Okay, so let's go back to the mind maps, and we know what the options are. We know that the marking scheme will, the very first thing the marking scheme will say under purpose, and purpose is the key, isn't it? We know that purpose is the key. The very first thing the marking scheme will say will be understanding of genre. So when I'm reading your essay, if I'm reading your short story, if I'm reading your speech, if I'm reading your discursive essay, whatever, nobody said you had to do that. You have had 7 options and you have decided to do that. So I need to see in your work evidence of the reason why you picked that, and the reason should be because you've prepared that style of writing. So I can see the hallmarks of a good personal essay in your work, or the hallmarks of a good short story, and so on. That's what understanding of genre means, and that is number 1 in the marking scheme, as you will see this evening. So remember, in English, especially in composing, how you write matters as much as what you write. So the style of writing, for example, in this, well, we're going to talk about the different elements of speech writing in a few minutes. The style of writing should demonstrate learning. So there's creativity, but as I said, that creativity has to be married to evidence of learning. So in other words, anybody who chooses to write a speech in their leaving cert, which is worth 25% overall, and then they write the speech and demonstrate no understanding of effective speech writing, those people are going to score badly. So no matter what your ideas are, if you can't demonstrate understanding of genre, you are immediately in trouble when it comes to composing. So it's really important. That's why I do the work on the different language genres as I begun with persuasive and speech writing. Remember, there will be a personal essay, there will be a speech, there will be a short story. There is a pattern over the last number of years. In fact, I think it's 8 years in a row now. It could be wrong, it could be 7, that there have been 2 personal essay options, simply for the fact that the personal essay is so popular, and to give students, and to really, to be honest with you, give examiners a bit of variety in what they're reading. So there's been 2 personal essay options, and for the last 3, could be 4 years in a row, there have been 2 short story options. Now remember, it's not written down anywhere that there definitely will be a speech, there definitely will be a personal essay, there definitely will be a short story. That could be different in your year, but it's extremely unlikely, and there's not written down anywhere there will be 2 personal essays, but we have to say there is a pattern in the exam of them giving you 2 personal essay options. Other options, as I already mentioned, include the discursive essay, the descriptive essay, the magazine article. There has been, I neglected to mention one, the dialogue, and the reason I neglected to mention it is because I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, but there's also sometimes the persuasive essays come up, and that's the other one that's missing from that list there. Remember, the basics you have to know. You study the fundamentals of not all of these, but whatever composing option you think is going to suit you best, you make sure you know the fundamentals of that style of writing. So if you think, yeah, I'm a personal essay writer, then you pay close attention to the work that we do together when I go to personal writing. Well, if you think that you're going to be perhaps writing a speech or a persuasive essay, then you make sure that you look at that speech writing material and the persuasive writing material that's on the platform, and so on. Okay, discursive writing is the argument, narrative writing is the short story, aesthetic techniques, of course, can add color to any kind of writing. So aesthetic writing is one that you can apply aesthetic techniques across all of the types of essay. Remember, when you're thinking about doing this work, it's really, really important that you try to reframe the reading comprehension style questions. So if you think about the reading comprehension style questions that we've looked at in the last couple of weeks, we've been asked to think about what made Chadwick Boseman's speech effective. we've been asked to think about what made the speech that was delivered in the 2025 exam effective. What made it good? Now, remember, what we were doing was looking for elements of a good speech. And then we were saying, this is the element, and here's what it does. So if you think about that from the composing section, you're just flipping that on its head. The examiner is reading your work, looking for those elements in your work. So if you decide to write a speech, and we're going to talk about speech writing tonight, some of you won't stay on the call after I've done this mind map because you're going, I'm not writing a speech, that's fine. But if you decide to write a speech, if you decide to write a personal essay, if you decide to write a short story, there are certain things an examiner will be looking for, and those things are outlined in the marking scheme every year. You need to be aware of what they are. The mind maps that I give you on the different language genres are built off of the marking schemes, so they specifically tell you what an examiner is looking for, and that's preparation that you need to do if you want to be in advance, if you want to be prepared in advance. Again, Connor, I will come to that in a second. So remember, composing is creative writing. Very important. One of the most important elements of the marking scheme is its reference to originality and freshness. This is something that the examiner is very, very, very interested in. As I said, work can be formulaic, it can be functional, and can score well in the 60s and even into the 70s if it's got enough depth to it. But in order to be hitting high marks, there has to be a sense of originality and freshness. That means understanding of genre. There it is there again. And it also means imagination, both in terms of the ideas or the contents contained within the essay, but also in the way the material is delivered. And again, it's difficult for you to understand what that means until we start looking at samples and drilling down into them, and hopefully that will give you a better picture. But remember, this section is worth 25%. If I have somebody here, Connor, saying to me, any advice for expanding answers? Loads of it, Connor. We're going to get to, don't forget, this is the first night we're doing this. We're going to be doing this on nearly, I'd say, 2/3 of our Sunday night will be on composing across the different styles of composing, Connor. But if you go into the exam and you go, well, I can only write 2 or 3 pages, the fact is that 2 or 3 pages is going to equate to about 600 words. And that means that that essay will be very short. And therefore, that's something you're aware of as a weakness in your preparation. And you've got to start tackling it. And I hope that attending these classes will help you do that. Yeah, Thomas, the fact is that there will be a speech. And the fact is that even the discursive essay, the skills that you're developing in the discursive essay cross over. There's a Venn diagram. So there's skills that you're learning in the speech that will also be applicable in the discursive essay. So don't worry if you're only good at one. And if you already know which one is your stronger one, that's great. And that's when you have to practice. Okay, that's when but the crucial thing is, if you don't know which one suits you, you need to think about that in advance. Now, Lily, so again, this is work that we've already been talking about in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to get to that exact question that you're asking me about structure right now. Okay, so that is the breakdown. And then in terms of speed, in terms of composing, I think there's loads of different options. I like an essay, a composing essay that opens with a quote. And again, is it going to change your grade? No, but it can make the sense that their work is going to be original and interesting. I'm going to show you some of those in a moment. If you are somebody who's thinking about writing an opinion piece, so the opinion pieces are the speech, the persuasive essay, the magazine article, sometimes, not always, and the discursive essay, then you need to read, and again, I'm really, really, really sorry if I'm offending anybody here, but if you are somebody who's wanting to do well and leaving Cert higher level English and you haven't got time to read, then you haven't got time to do well. So you find the time on a weekly basis to sit down and read, for example, good journalism or short stories. And I can give you the names of books of short stories. When we get to narrative writing, I will give you the names of books of short stories. If you're thinking about where do I find good journalism, well, you go into, this is the Irish Times. Now, the Irish Times is a subscription. I happen to have a subscription to it. I'm not logged into it here now. You go in online and you go to good, respectable, newspapers of merit. So in other words, newspapers which are have a good reputation, and you go and you find the opinion section and you read some of those opinion pieces. And you don't read them because you're necessarily trying to be a more educated human being, although I would love that to be true. You not read them because you're looking to challenge the man and what the man has to say about things. You're reading them because you see all those people: Breda O'Brien, Cliff Taylor, Mark O'Connor, Diarmuid Ferder, Stephen Collins, Michael McDowell, Finn McRedmond. You see all those people, Rachel O'Dwyer. They earn their living. They feed their kids. They put the mortgage in the bank by being good writers. And they write opinions. And opinion means discursive writing, and it means the qualities of an effective speech, where you can deliver a point forcefully using some of the skills I've told you. So one of the things you have to do, this is actually getting a little bit. So again, as I said, this is one night. When I get to short stories, I'm going to get to short stories when we do that work, okay? And again, personal essays. Guys, I say this with love. I am going to cover everything thoroughly, but I'm going to cover it on my schedule, okay? And I'll deal with personal essay writing, and there's already material on the platform, pre-recorded material advising you what to do with personal essays, the same with short stories. But those kinds of questions, tonight we're talking about the composing section, and we're talking about finishing the work we're doing about how to write an effective speech. So the questions have to be pointed towards that. So be well read, very important. Practice writing paragraphs, really, really important. And I'll talk about what the A-B structure is now in a couple of minutes. And again, you're going to say, well, how do I do that? Be patient and let me show you examples. If you're writing a short story, and some of you will write short stories, it's good to have a bit of prep done, character sketches, set in descriptions. You listen to interviews, podcasts with people who write short stories, novelists, and they'll often tell you that the places described in their stories are based on real places. The characters that feature in their stories are based on real people, that they take notes, that they record interactions with people, and that they all go into their story. So that's something that really good short story writers do, and it gives you something to again, Lydia, when we get to the personal essay section, I'm going to give you loads of things to read, okay? Loads of things to read. Now, to come to a question that I was asked by a number of people, your length of your essay, all of the essays that you write on the Leaving Cert, as I've already said, all of them, and that's, you're writing one essay on paper one, that's the composing, and you're writing 3 essays on paper 2, that's your single text, most of you that's Macbeth, your comparative, that one will be a little bit longer than any other essay, and your studied poetry essay, and you're talking about in and around 1,000 words for each one of those essays. Now remember, nowhere is that written in the marking scheme, so that's very important for you to understand. Nowhere is an examiner going to use an AI to scan your paper to make sure you hit 1,000 words and take marks off you if it's not 1,000 words. What I'm saying to you is a substantial essay to be produced in the reasonable time given to you for each one of those sections is somewhere around 1,000 words. Their top tier students will be producing essays of about 1,200 words, but remember, you aim for quality over quantity every single time. How did those people help with effective speech? So are you talking about the journalists, Dylan? Are you talking about the journalists? So what's it? So, okay. So a speech is an opinion. And as I've already been through over the last 3 weeks, there are loads of tricks of the trade for people to grab the attention of an audience with a speech and to be convincing and persuasive. And all of those journalists are skilled in that exact job. So as I keep on saying, the more you read professional writers, the more you read opinion pieces, the more you become aware of how to deliver a convincing case, a convincing argument, and that will help you with your writing of speeches. No, Dara, in this section, you're not marked by paragraphs. You're marked overall at the end of the essay.